Growing tomatoes, it's a little bit like catching fish. You throw a line in and you hope to get a big one. And today we're going to see if we can get a big one with tomatoes. And mind you, this is just a tomato knee pad. It's not a real tomato, but that's how much tomatoes have permeated through horticulture. They've brought them out as a knee pad. Anyway, first thing here, our Mr. Ugly. And what a wonderful plant we have growing. You probably remember a month or so when we potted these up, and look at them. Put a little stake in. It's got a little bit big for the stake. We're a bit late with this show. We should have been doing this probably last week, but been very busy down here in the nursery. But you can see a little stake there that we put in, and then grew this plant. It's a tad hungry, I'll admit that. But you know, commercial growers, they love putting in hungry tomato seedlings. It makes them tough. And the other thing they like to do too is plant them a little bit deeper. So what we might do is just take off those, clean it up down the bottom there. This plant will actually grow roots from outside the stem. So I'll get rid of that stake. Of course, label, very important. I always tell you, put the label in the pot so you know what you've got. Now, this is our pot that we could just break up. And we're going to just break him up, and I'm going to see how this goes. I've never done this before with a biodegradable pot. This is made from mycanthus grass, and we're going to compost him in the ground. I've got some beautiful potting mix, nice and full and chunky, a little bit of sand in there, and that's going to be just perfect. And I'm going to put him in quite deep because, again, this will provide support. I've seen growers plant a tomato like that, up to here, and then have it turn around and grow up because they believe it gives it a nice strong plant. But anyway, we're going to go right down in there and plant it nice and deep. Right, now the other thing to think about here is supporting the plant. Support is very important because once the tomato's full of fruit, and this Mr. Ugly has very large beefsteak tomatoes, and it gets very heavy on the plant. The plant will stress and it will not fruit as much without decent support. Now, what I've got here is one of these tomato cages, and there's two ends to it. A lot of people think that you put that end in, but you don't. They just keep these like this to make it safe when we sell them, but just pull these out, right, and gently over the plant, and push it right down and into the plant. I'm not saying that that's enough support. You may need to further put tent pegs in and hold these down. If you grow this in a really big plant, it might be handy to have it near some other stakes or near a fence or something like that to further grow the plant. And it depends how you prune the plant, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So there we go, and with this, it's not that tall, this cage, so when the plant gets to the top, I would probably pinch the growth tips out. You take about that much off the top of the plant, that would keep it short and stocky, otherwise find it something else to trellis off into. All right, so there's our tomato. We'll water that, and then it's ready to go. Okay, when you're fishing, you've got to know a few tricks, don't you? You've got to get a few special silver wobblers out there to do the job. And I don't know much about that, so I'll move on to tomatoes. And this one here is a magic tomato food, Phostrogen tomato food. Now, if you look carefully at the analysis on the bottom of this box, the potassium is much higher than the nitrogen. Most liquid fertilizers, the nitrogen is much higher than the potassium. Good for leafy growth, but won't help set fruit. This will, and the tomato food has the added bonus of calcium, extra calcium, which will help prevent blossom end rot, a problem when the tips of your tomatoes start going black. So can thoroughly recommend the Phostrogen. You put a teaspoon in the watering can, fill it up with water, stir it around and water it on. In a pot, I'd do that once a week. In the garden bed, a couple of times a week. But keep an eye on your plants because, for instance, I've got another Mr. Ugly here. It just looks that little bit hungry. It's going, you can sort of see that lighter green. It needs a feed. It's in a small pot, it's a big plant. So a little bit of feed and you'll soon see it green up and you'll know that it's a good healthy looking plant. This one here, probably a little bit healthier. Now this one here is actually a grafted tomato. And what happens, they've put two varieties of tomato into the pot. One is a wild rootstock, a wild vine from South America that has terrible fruit. And what we do is we chop the top off that, throw it away. But then we take this other plant and we graft it onto that plant. And all of a sudden, this normal Groslis or Mighty Red or whatever plant it is, takes on super tomato forces, massive. You can get these growing along a fence 5 or 6 metres. Now what you do with them is you don't pull all the side shoots off. So we're going to have a close look here now at a side shoot just in there, and it's between the shade leaf, very important for protecting the plant from the sun, and then this little side shoot in here. On a grafted tomato we can let that shoot develop, and if we took other shoots off that shoot it can grow very long and we can get a very long vine growing and grow this plant like a passion fruit and get up to 4 or 5 times more fruit than a normal tomato. But remember, extra food and extra water to keep this one going, and we'd put it in a big pot if we're doing it in a pot. All right, just talking of pinching tomatoes, I've got this Mr. Ugly here again because we did grow quite a few of them, and we are going to prune it. A lot of people ask me about pruning tomatoes, and what I say to them is your tall growers you need to prune. Your short growers, like a little tumbler tomato that just grows this, 1 foot high, they don't have to be pruned. They are determinate tomatoes. They've already determined how they're going to grow. This is an indeterminate tomato, so we can have some say in how it grows. So what I'd be doing is pinching off these shoots. And remember, if the shoots get too big, make sure you use a blade, otherwise you might cut into the plant a bit deep and be susceptible for diseases. And I'd take all these shoots off here, this little shoot off in here, this shoot off in here. Now, professional growers have 1 to 2 main leaders. Your number 1 leader is the one at the top in the middle, of course. Below the first flower truss, here's your second leader. These are the 2 that you really grow and develop. And take all other shoots off, and even as these grow out, you might end up taking some shoots off them as well. So you get these 2 or 3 strong growing limbs that are going to have the trusses of fruit. And of course, other people would object to what I've just done, and they'd say, don't pinch it at all. It's very bushy, it doesn't get good airflow through it, but it will get a lot of fruit, but they should be slightly smaller in size. And of course, if you want to grow a 1 pound tomato, here's the secret. Grow this plant, pinch all the shoots off and all the flowers except for let 1 tomato develop. And if you only let 1 tomato grow on the bush, you'll get a 1 pounder. All right, the other thing that I could have put in the bottom of that pot with the cage around it that we did just before was some basil. Now my suggestion to you with basil, always smell it. Have a look, there's usually a few different brands. So yeah, this one smells a little bit more aniseedy. Now the reason there, that basil has probably got some rogue seeds in it that have a very strong aniseed smell. This one, beautiful Italian Genovese type smell basil. This is a great one, and don't be afraid to just plant it in a couple of clumps. Like that could probably go again into another clump. So don't spread it all individually. They don't like to be transplanted individually. There's a plant, there's a plant. Right, you get another 2 clumps out of that. So you've got 4 plants out of the 1 pot. So certainly look for basil with lots of little seedlings coming up. Don't buy a basil with just 1 plant coming up. You're not getting value for money.